So, hello, welcome everyone. I'm so happy to have you join us today. My name is Ann Bradford. I am the chair of Wellbeing Week and of the After Party, and I'm also the vice president of the new nonprofit, the Institution for Wellbeing and Law, which we call I Will. And the After Party is an event of I Will and is sponsored by the Professional Development Consortium. And I just wanted to pop in here in the introduction before we get to Mary and David to explain a little bit about why I was really excited to have them as part of our program and why we chose them for the program in talking about more organizational level strategies to foster well-being. And the work that they're going to talk about came up for me in two different streams of research on two different topics I was working on. The first one was diversity and inclusion, that there's lots of evidence in team research, team performance, team productivity, showing that when teams have common mental models, they perform better. So that means they have sort of similar concepts about what success looks like, how we communicate, all those things that help make teams perform better. So mental models, is what we're after. And evidence also suggests that when you have diverse teams, they often don't start out with common mental models, that if they have similar backgrounds, if they're similar to each other, they're more likely to have common mental models. And when they're different, they may have different assumptions. And if they're not made more explicit, it can harm performance and ultimately well-being. And so the academic literature can be pretty frustrating because it says, we want common mental models, but it doesn't say how to do it. So the second topic where this came up was in studying work-life conflict. And one of the experiences that creates work-life conflict is preoccupation with work. So having too much work to do and working too many hours is certainly part of the issue. But being preoccupied with work also raises the experience of conflict. So even though you're not working, you're still ruminating about work or worrying, do I need to be checking my email? Do I need to respond right away? Those kinds of things. And so when I got directed to David and Mary's book, I was so excited that they are finally showing us the practical strategies about how to do these things. So with the preoccupation, one of the problems is there's not enough explicit discussion of what the work norms are. What is responsiveness? What are the working expectations for the weekends? Like all those kinds of things that are important for team functioning and to allow people to unhook are often left silent. And leaders will often assume that everyone thinks just like they do, and then they're disappointed when everyone doesn't respond just the way they want them to and think, oh, people should have known. Well, they don't necessarily know. And so it's important to find ways to have these explicit discussions to improve common mental models and also to set these norms. And so I'm so excited that, and both of these things obviously are highly related to well-being and also performance. So I was really excited that the Sherwins were able to join us to talk about some really practical strategies about how to get at some of these things. I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen to introduce them more formally.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Gretchen Rose. I'm an HR director with Cozen O'Connor, and I am welcoming you to user design thinking to clarify team work expectations and support work-life management. David and Mary Sherwin are co-founders of Ask the Sherwins LLC, a consulting and training firm that helps organizations develop the capabilities for better product design and stronger cross-functional teamwork. They've coached product service teams around the world and provided training for organizations large and small, including Philips Oral Healthcare, Google UX Community and Culture, and Eventbrite. The Sherwins are also active in the design education space and are currently teaching in the MFA program in collaborative design at PNCA. David and Mary have collaborated on 3 books. Their most recent book is Turning People into Teams, Rituals and Routines That Redesign How We Work. A 30% discount is available on this book, and the Related Teams Toolkit is available through July 31st. You can find more information about this on the After Party webpage on lawyerwellbeing.net. David and Mary, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for that introduction. It's lovely to be here. So my name is Mary Sherwin. This is David Sherwin.
Hello.
There's only two of us, so that introduction went swimmingly fast. So the first thing we wanted to do was to thank you for joining us. And we're going to do the rules first because, you want to get the bad news out of the way. We're going to talk for a little bit. You're going to work for a little bit, talk and then work. We're going to use the chat function at key points so that you can all see each other's work. So don't go too far from your keyboard. If you haven't already, you might want to grab a sheet of paper or a notebook and something to write with in case something strikes you that you want to talk about at a later point. We also have some time set aside for Q&A. There are way more of you than there are of us. We are small but mighty, however, so we're going to do our best to get to people. We may not get to everyone, but you can have our email at the end, we promise. There are no bad questions. The internet is forever. We're recording this, so you'll have this, and we'll have a PDF of this presentation deck available for you as well. Okay, so let's do it. This is just to make sure you're in the right room. The goal for today's workshop is to learn how to use hands-on practical exercises to help your teams align on how they want to work together. But really, the idea behind this workshop is that the people stuff workshops, they have a lot of really great ideas and a lot of really good goals, but too often they're really separate from the actual work of work. And we're trying to change that. So that's probably the best place to start, as in who are we? Who is this we?
So I'm David, and I've got over 20 years of experience working as a designer and an educator, and it's been doing product innovation work, social good, and pretty much everything in between.
And I'm Mary. I come from organizational development. I went through education, stopped at content strategy, and now I'm here. Kind of repeating the excellent introduction we already got, but together we have worked and trained all over the world, working across corporate, nonprofit, education. We've written some books. Generally, we stay pretty busy. And the gist of what we do is this, that we teach the C skills. Communication, collaboration, creative thinking, critical thinking, which sounds very top of the mountain, right? But it's basically this. We teach teams how to design their own teamwork so they can do their actual work without wanting to punch each other. It is our hope today that you will be able to use what we cover in this workshop back with your own teams. But we know that in order to do that, you're probably going to need some of our rationale, because asking people to think about things from a design point of view is sometimes a really difficult climb. So you might be wondering what design can offer to folks who aren't designers, like doctors or politicians or lawyers. So let's talk about that for a sec. So design. Most people think about that as, mobile apps and posters and toasters, like really cool eyewear and Apple and Instagram, but those are just flavors of design. In a lot of respects, design is just like law. The distinctions are in the adjective that you put right in front of it. So visual design, industrial design, service design. The two of us don't just work with designers, we work with just about everybody. But we still use that word, design, in the work that we do. And we're going to invite you to use that word in the work that you're going to do today and the work that you do moving forward with these kinds of tools. So that previous slide where I'd said we teach teams how to design their own teamwork. We use the word design instead of put together or come up with or finagle, because if you design something, even if you're not a designer, there's an intentionality to it. There's also an implied flexibility to it. As years have gone on, the definition of good design has really changed. So nowadays, good design is not static. It's not fixed. The best designs are adaptable, they're flexible, and they are intended to grow with the needs of the people using them. So they allow people to have agency, to grow, to change. Design is no longer this one and done option. That's why we use design as the verb when we're thinking about teamwork. It's not because we want you all to leave your jobs and come and join us, though that would be cool. Okay, so we've got that part squared away. So let's talk design thinking. So designers talk a lot about design thinking, and it started as this little twinkle like back in the 60s. And then it really codified in the 80s in the age of personal computing. And now you kind of see it everywhere, like all up and down the private and public sector, whether people do design or not. And if you ask people what it is, after a while, it sort of drifts over into circular logic land, and it starts to sound like design thinking is how designers think about design, and you can too. And that's true, but realistically, it doesn't really help anyone, because design thinking isn't about products. It's not about the stuff or the things. It's about the problems that the things can help solve. Design thinking is a process, and here it is. Here's a great like this is the D school model. This is a great model for it. This is it in a nutshell. You define the problem. You come up with some ideas. So in the top right, that's the ideate part. You build a little something. That's the prototype part in the bottom right. And then you see if it works. And that's the test part in the middle. And then you repeat that cycle to deepen your knowledge. And that's it. Really, that's it. It's a very simple cycle. Okay, that's actually not it, because you may have noticed, like in the top left there's that word empathize. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Okay, so what's relevant for today is the build part, that prototype part, and the see if it works part, that test part in the middle, and this idea of the fact that it's a cycle, it repeats. And design thinking, when we think about it in this way, it really changes the dynamics of our teams. It allows us to approach problem solving with a different understanding of motivation, risk, knowledge, because remember, we're trying to go further than one and done. Okay, so all of that brings us to teamwork. Teamwork can be designed with intention, and it can be designed by a team to be more inclusive, to provide people with more agency in decision making, to really bring out the specifics of how people want to work together. And if I'm feeling really top of the mountain about this, like I can tell you that teamwork can be designed to disrupt power dynamics, for seismic shifts in the status quo, to really challenge long-standing assumptions about how we work. And all of those, that's just the way that it is, moments that leave us feeling helpless or burned out, overwhelmed. And all that sounds really awesome, right? Those are all things we want. But what does that actually look like? So what can you actually design? So the things that we're just going to cover today, this is just a small portion of the things that you can design this way. Individual and shared values, how we see those values in our behavior, our shared norms, and feedback on work expectations. All right, let's do it. The first thing was we're going to talk about moving from values to behaviors on teams. So there we were, the two of us traveling the world, helping teams out. And a few years back, we had an epiphany. Okay, maybe epiphany is a little bit too strong of a word. A realization, an insight, to use the design word, that most problems on teams happen because of a failure of vocabulary. You've got a team that you're trying to align to be better at teamwork. Maybe you've got an initiative or some really good funding, and we would come in and we would look at mission, vision, values. We would interview some people, read the website and the investor reports, and this is how it would go. Okay, well, actually, if I'm being honest, this is still kind of how it goes. You know, we would hear from, the company as a voice. Well, the core value of our firm is collaboration, and we want to increase team ownership and accountability on every project. Inclusion is critical, so everyone's perspectives are taken into account. And then we would talk to maybe some other people in the company, and they would think about this. And then this is what would come back. Awesome, that sounds great. But how does our team do that? And, the organization would think it over for a little bit, maybe pay a consultant some money to put together a report, and voila, we are going to try Lean Six Sigma, Radical Candor, Servant Leadership. Looks like it's working for our competitors. Let's go get trained in how to do this. And our teams are going to be awesome. Everything's going to be better. It's rad. And that is not what people are asking for. They wanted to know how they can collaborate, literally. Teams want to be able to create norms for how they work together. They want a voice and a choice in how the work gets done. They want to be able to make decisions and set expectations and fix things that go wrong. They don't really want another certification or something with a TM on it. Though I'm not going to lie, it would be really cool to have a Sherwin certification. It's not that any of those things are bad. It's just that they don't actually let the team design their experience. It really is the difference between following a recipe and learning to cook. Teams need to be able to own their experiences that they create so that they're more invested in the outcome. And the thing is that design thinking is not immune to this phenomenon. So a lot of design thinking talks about that word that we skipped earlier, empathy. We've seen more teams asking for this. We want ways to collaborate to create more empathy, or even just we want more empathy. We need to have more. But what is empathy? We teach our students about Daniel Goleman's model, which actually has 3 different types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, compassionate empathy. So cognitive empathy means you understand what someone is feeling or experiencing on an intellectual level. Emotional empathy is as if emotions are contagious through identification. You feel what they feel. And then there's compassionate empathy. And that's where the connection with another person drives you to act. So even design thinking, bringing this word empathy, it feels like it's a magical word, but even when we're talking about something like this, we're looking at a really complicated landscape. There are a lot of implications in just these simple words. It's something that we can bring, but it's not necessarily better. So David and I came up with a different way of approaching this problem. So for example, let's think about the word dedicated. We work on a team and our team is dedicated. So ask yourself this question. How do you see that word in how your team works? How do your coworkers see it in your work? And have you ever sat down with your team and talked about that? We assume that everybody uses the same words and that they mean the same thing to everyone. But I am here to tell you, if you did not know or already know this, or maybe I'm just confirming what you already know, this is not true, even from my own experience. I'm a disabled designer. The word dedicated, that lived experience, what that looks like in the workplace, that is very different for me than it is for other people. And it's the behaviors that are the difference. It's the things that we do. And the doing is the important part. This, for us, was the missing piece. This move from values to behaviors. And this was our second insight. Values sound good. Behaviors do good. So we developed from this insight a team ritual. And if your ears immediately perked up at the word ritual, we are going to get to that in the later part of the talk. But for now, if you remember that design thinking loop, just sort of attach it right to the center of it's the repeat part. So we're going to walk you through this. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to identify your working values. So we got these words from our own experience with teams and from a lot of desk research, looking at how teams talk about themselves. We've got a full word list in our book. We even developed a card deck for this exercise in particular, but this is sort of a shorter, truncated version, and it works really well just to show you how this works. You ask each person on your team to choose the words that appeal to them, and they work individually at first. And That seems counterintuitive, but it's essential to give each person space at the start. It also really helps temper the influence and bias factor. So each person finds their value words, and when each team member has these, they get to share those words and they explain why they chose them. And you give each person an equal amount of time to speak. And yeah, use a timer if you have to. And speaking means speaking, not discussing. So equal time to speak, no questions, no rebuttals. Everyone gets the same space. And we'll talk a little bit more about the principle of equal time a little bit later. And once everyone has presented, then the discussion begins. And you're trying to get to maybe 3 to 5 words to describe your team. You may be tempted to provide definitions for these words, but don't. The dictionary is not really our friend here. We don't always agree on what these words mean because they don't mean the same thing to everyone. The assumption that they do is where we get into trouble. Some teams use this in the space of social justice, where owning definitions is one of the ways that bad power stays in power. And that's also a failure of vocabulary. So the entire team has to agree on these words. If you're facilitating this conversation, really pay attention to the trade-offs that the team makes as they sort of narrow in on their words. So this team picked collaborative, visionary, and passionate. And they'll take those words and they sort of spray paint them on their walls, and they put them on some coffee mugs, and they put them on their website, and they usually stop there. And here's why you should keep going. Because everyone has that reliable colleague, right? That trustworthy friend. There's great empowering words, those value words. They are the highest of praise. And when we hear them and they come back to us, they feel really good. But when things go wrong, we call each other unethical or disrespectful. They're not very approachable, these lack of value words. And there's a line that gets crossed with that. If someone says that I don't respect them, what can I possibly say? In a workplace construct, what can I do? That's not a conversation about solving problems. It's not a space where a team can improve and grow together. When things are going poorly, we use those words as weapons. So you really need step 2. So let's go back to that word dedicated. So if we say that we're dedicated, what behaviors are we doing to show that? That one's perfect for like present day. What are we currently doing? And the one at the bottom is for the team that's going for future work, improvement work. If we want to be more dedicated, what behaviors can we bring into our work? You can use either formulation. Of course, we usually recommend the one that's on the top, the current one, because you need a good audit of what you've got before you go about changing anything. It also helps teams build accountability a lot faster than the one about behaviors in the future. The one on the bottom, you have to be pretty disciplined about that because it can quickly tip over into like events and functions like, oh, hey, we could do a service day or we could do a hackathon rather than those day-to-day behaviors for each other on a team. And we're trying to make a better team. We're trying to make you a better team to each other first. Here's yet another like key for this is that you have to be specific enough that team members can say definitively that they did or didn't do it. Otherwise, it is just someone's opinion. Behaviors are visible. If you close your eyes, you might be able to imagine that behavior happening in real time. Our design students, we tell them that they should be able to sketch it. So, let's look at this. Let's look at this in action. Okay, so this team is like, hey, if we're going to be collaborative, I want us to give each other feedback on our work regularly. If you see an adverb, that usually means you need to be more specific, right? So, poke at that a little bit. Okay, what would that look like if it were more specific? Okay, we're going to meet every Tuesday for 1 hour, and each of us gets 10 minutes to provide focused feedback on work in progress. Now, the team can talk about what focused feedback means, but regularly now has a definition that the team can share. Every Thursday, 1 hour, 10 minutes. And then the team could talk about it and like, yay, we're going to try that. We're going to see what happens. You roll it around for a couple of weeks, see if it works, and then you revisit it. And we'll talk about the revisiting part in just a minute. So maybe you're a sticky note person, so you might all work together. Looking at the word collaborative. So this team wants every minute to start with 5 minutes for the team to share how they're doing. They always want to present work to clients as we, the team, we've prepared this for you. That one in the middle, always a hot spot. You know, we respond to emails sent after 7 p.m. on the following business day at 8 a.m. You'll notice all of these are positive behaviors. There are things that you currently do or that you will do, not things that you won't do. And here's why. When people commit to a behavior and then they don't do it, it's not because they're horrible people. It's not because they're liars. It's more likely that something in the environment changed so that the behavior they agreed to is no longer viable. It just no longer works. So if someone sends an email to a client at midnight, because that never happens, right? The team can ask, okay, what changed? Instead of you promised that you'd be collaborative and you broke your promise, like you're not living our values because you can't walk away from a conversation like that, right? There are no weapons involved in these conversations that way. The team can discuss the realities of the situation. You've got a team member who says, oh, you know, when we agreed to this timeline, we underestimated this aspect of the project. It is about problem solving, not blaming or shaming. The email thing in particular is kind of a habit with a lot of folks. So if that's the case, the team can develop some ways to help that team member stick to the team's established behaviors. They're going to need some adjacent support in order to change that so that they can keep to this value of collaborative. This sounds really basic. It can even sound prescriptive, but you may be surprised at how many issues you can solve just by uncovering people's expectations about their values and how they manifest in the workspace. So you don't want to have a great conversation about this and then have it sit in someone's Google Drive, right? You need step 3. You need this concept of visibility. Speaking of visibility, you're going to need your keyboard in a minute or two. So if you have a cat, you should start preparing now. When we all started working from home, we had no idea how many of our friends and colleagues had this negotiation with their cat and their keyboard. And so now we mention it every time we have a meeting because it's a real thing. We had no idea. So start talking to your cat now. So we love this graphic because it's kind of based on a real thing. We worked with a team that had their commitments on a wall in their workspace. But anyway, your commitment, it needs to be visible and it needs to be accessible. Your team can sort your behaviors into time buckets like this team did if you want to. Some behaviors are really only important at certain key points. You know, maybe only during an all hands or right before a board meeting. And some teams really want to capture those. So you need to capture this in a way that's not super permanent either. Teams need to be able to change things because things change, right? Values take a long time to change. Behaviors can change in a matter of weeks. You'll discover new behaviors. You will adapt old ones for new projects. You'll put away ones that just don't work for you anymore. You'll make some a little bit more specific. You'll decide that one that was happening once a week is really only possible once a month. Maybe your team wants to try working on a particular behavior every single day. You can do this however your team wants. You can make this visible to other teams. You can make this visible to your clients if you want. You can even modify this exercise to use with your clients to define your relationships. You can set those expectations right up front. And if you can't get your team to do this exercise, we encourage you to do it for yourself. Being clear about what you want, how you recognize what's important to you. People aren't mind readers, and being specific about not just what's nice or important to you, but what's necessary for you and your work. It makes communicating with others about those things a lot easier, a lot more productive. It helps you be more accountable to others and to yourself. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to David.
Right, and now we're going to move into a little activity, so get ready. It's your time to shine. We're going to give you a chance to put a little bit of this into practice. So what we'd like you to do is think about a value word that you would use to describe your ideal project team environment when you're at work. Write that word down. And you can also type that word into the Zoom chat so everybody here can have a chance to see it. So here's our little pro tip. This may be an adjective that isn't specifically noted in your firm's core values. And we put that note in there because some of you may already be working within an established value system where the words are already in play for your company. And some teams do come up with new words. Some just use the established words. They determine which behaviors work for them underneath that. So this is totally up to you. But if you have the option, it's okay to step away from the company line, at least in this webinar, at least for what we're trying to do. And if it's helpful for you, we're going to show you that word list. I'll give you a couple of seconds for the word that you want to work with. I think so far we're seeing a lot of respect going up in the chat. Curious.
Oh, we got to vote for proactive,
collaborative, supportive. That's great. I feel like everybody here so far, it's like you immediately have sort of like something that's top of mind for you, which is great.
This is the great thing. You always, like, if somebody asks you this, that first word immediately pops to mind.
Which is awesome. All right, so everybody should have a word. Everybody should have a word. It's going to carry that because you know what's coming.
You know it's coming.
You know
next.
exactly know what's coming. So we're going to focus on the behaviors. So what we want you to do is take about 5 minutes to consider what specific behaviors you would want to see at work, ideally when you're working with teams, that's related to that value word. And we want you to think of at least 3 specific behaviors and be prepared to share one of them with everyone in the webinar if you are comfortable doing so. Don't put this in the chat yet. Give yourself the individual space and time to work. Because 5 minutes, it might seem like a long time, but it isn't a long time. So if you don't get through this, that's fine. It's more so to expose your brain to this way of thinking, and we'll keep time. We'll give you a 2-minute warning and then 30-second warning on this. So I'm going to start the clock right now. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat about this process. And remember, positive things that you will do or that you currently do, ideally what you currently do, rather than things that you don't do. If you need an example of what a specific behavior looks like, we're going to put that back up here for you so you can see it. All right, you got about 2 minutes left. You're doing great. All right, we've got 30 seconds to go. Okay, let's get ready to transition to the next step. And thinking back to what Mary was saying when we're talking about just using design thinking, we're preparing to prototype and build some of these behaviors. So if we were doing this back with our teams at work, we would then see if these behaviors were going to work over a couple of weeks and check back in with the team. We'd make adjustments and we'd try again. Okay, so in the context of what we're doing here, now's the time to type your value word and one of your specific behaviors into the chat. So you're sharing with everybody that's here if you're comfortable doing so. So you can just format it like this. Here's the word, and here's the specific behavior. So for example, collaborative. We don't respond to emails sent after 7 p.m. till the following business day after 8 a.m. would be an example of that. So we'll keep our eye on the chat, and then we're going to use what you share in the chat to wrap up this activity. All right.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Bring it
They're
on.
coming in. Bring it all. All right, great.
Y'all are awesome.
Yes, awesome. So we're just reading through them as we go, and we would ask that all of you read them as well because we're gonna build on it.
Ooh, let's look at this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so we may be picking on, we're not picking on people, but we're just kind of bringing things for examples. So Amber Scott has respect, checking with coworkers on how they are, and if they need help with anything, asking for help if you need it. So this is a huge thing, right? Which is you kind of get into the stop sign where everyone's like, no, you go first. No, you go first, because people aren't clear of like, am I the one that asks you for help, or do you need to offer help first? So really like pulling apart that behavior and being like, respect is saying, I will help you and I am going to ask first, or you are going to ask me. And that of course has another behavior with it, which is if somebody asks for help, you provide it within a certain period of time, right? So it's like this thing that sort of grows into this bigger cultural phenomenon.
Awesome. Let's look at this one from Melissa. Curious. We encourage questions and conclude every meeting with a call for questions. I love this one. The reason is that you found an existing ritual or thing that you do in the workplace and you tied a behavior to it. So that way, when you walk out of that meeting, you would know you were or weren't successful because nobody asked if anybody had any questions. So this is a good example of, you could say like you definitively did or didn't do that specific thing. Okay, we're going to read a couple more and then we're going to talk about a couple more. Okay, we got
Oh,
supportive.
this one. I
timing.
like that one.
Okay, let's go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So Gavin Alexander, transparent when providing deadlines, explaining the rationale for setting that date and time. So this is, you know, people think that design is really freewheeling, but we are run by timelines and deadlines. And knowing why someone needs something when, that's a great moment of agency, right? It's just like, I'm not just asking for this because it's convenient. I need this because of blah, blah, blah. It also helps people characterize time in a different way. There are so many things that are really time specific, and giving people kind of an understanding of why you need what you need and when. You know, there's sort of this like, we're all in this together, and you know, our timelines kind of they have to move together. So this is, you know, kind of emergency on your, you know, poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part, sort of thing.
Cool. So I'm gonna compare two. So two folks talk about trust and autonomy. So Daniel, you've got one that says autonomy, flexibility, set clear expectations about final work product and deadlines without laying out requirements or specific steps on how we're going to get there, and asking the team to develop those steps. So you're giving the team ownership of the process and how you're going to get there. So this is something that is like really breaking down sort of the ways of working. I was going to compare that with the one from Paul Daly, trust. We provide autonomy to team members and trust each other to do what we say we will. I'm kind of comparing these two side by side because you can tell when you have a value inside a behavior that there's actually potentially a lot of other information inside that to get to specifics. And so it's really helpful to break down some of these words in the behaviors themselves and be like, okay, wait, am I talking about trust or autonomy? Is autonomy actually the value of the team in terms of the ground level ways that they're working? And then in terms of autonomy, what are the team members doing specifically that's going to help them to accomplish what they needed so they feel like they own what's happening?
Yeah, trust in particular is like, it's such a beautiful word, but it kind of has, there's a lot of heat around it, right? Because trust is the meeting of expectations over time, right? So you know, we talk a lot about like how quickly you can gain trust, but really there's this sort of like, what is that person expecting that is this reinforcement? What are they going to see? What are they going to hear? What are they going to experience? And so kind of thinking about trust being sort of locked together with this idea of expectation of, you know, those tangible relationship things. That's a really good place to sort of, you know, really focus your eye on.
So if anyone on your team struggles with this activity, and some people do struggle with this, it doesn't matter whether you're young and old, you're experienced, it really doesn't matter. I'll tell you the number one reason why. So think about those questions. How do you see your values come to life? How do you translate the actions of others into the values of the team? How does the team show its values through concrete actions? We don't ask these questions. We don't even ask ourselves these questions. And giving our team and ourselves a way to recognize something like respect or ambition or support, to see in action and make the leap in our minds to recognize the efforts of others, to expand our definitions of what those values could be and what they could include by seeing how they're lived by others, and to better understand the role that we can play in making our workplace better, just all of those things. We don't do a very good job of that either. So the reason that people struggle with this is honestly because they haven't been practicing. No one's given them the chance. So we're going to pause here for just a few minutes to open up the space for any questions about what we just covered before we go on to talking about norms and expectations. And remember, if we don't get to you, we've got another Q&A session planned near the end of the workshop, and you're always welcome to email us. So we're going to look here in the chat if there are any questions. If there are not, then we'll just dig into some new stuff and do some more activities.
We might just be like, hey, let's just eat some more. Let's not talk. Let's eat. Let's eat more coffee.
I'm going to sip some coffee.
I know. I'm just like, do. Okay, we got a question. How do you communicate when a leader sets an expectation that you believe is unreasonable? my first part of that would be how, like, thinking about the process of how that expectation got set. Is this a misunderstanding of resources, of allocation? When if you're coming at it from a no, that's totally not reasonable, we have to kind of figure out what it becomes that value word sort of in reverse in your own mind. So are there conditions that are in your way that make that unreasonable? What would reasonable look like? Is there sort of, it's like, it's very difficult to ask people to stop doing a behavior because you kind of need something to replace it with. It's sort of like you replace a habit with a better habit. So it might be a way to think about it from that perspective.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer Gretchen's question just to keep us on time. So is there an optimal number of behaviors for a team? Does it ever get too overwhelming?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
We recommend when teams are starting to use specific behaviors and their ways of working, you don't have more than 8. Like 8 or 9 is the maximum that a team can really keep track of and discuss.
Yeah.
The idea is that if you get good at those 8 or 9 behaviors and becoming routine as part of your ways of working, it's something that will become unspoken, and then you can build on that and add additional behaviors. So definitely you want to start with a limited number, and you want to make it easy enough that people can actually keep track of it. Okay, so we're going to come back to this question from Karina. Do the proposed values of those higher in the hierarchy carry more weight than those lower in the hierarchy? That's going to come up a bit in the next section, but I think we should come back to this question. So don't worry, we're going to come back to this one.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks for those questions. That's great. So we're going to move to the second half of this workshop, which is about designing rituals to reinforce team norms and expectations. So for those of you who are ears perked up about us using the word ritual, this is the section for you. So teams aren't just built person by person. They're built behavior by behavior. This is really our third insight about teamwork. And now that you know something about what we mean by behaviors, and you've seen how they connected to something larger, our values, for us, the question is, how do we use design thinking to encourage and support the behaviors that benefit our teams? We believe it's through the use and the design and the use of team rituals. So what do we mean? What do we mean by rituals?
What does that
mean? So rituals are group activities where people go through a series of behaviors in a specific order for a purpose greater than themselves. We taught you a ritual earlier in the first part of this workshop. So you have a sense of what we mean when we talk about a group activity like this. Now, some people, when they hear the word ritual, they immediately think religion, but it does not have to sit in that space. Birthdays have rituals. The Super Bowl has rituals. Taco Tuesday is a ritual. What do we value as a team is a ritual too, and there's a structure behind workplace rituals, which is what we're going to dig into. So workplace rituals drive and define team behavior, and over time they become routines. When enough people in an organization take on a ritual, it becomes part of how their cultural values are expressed. And if you cue the right ritual when a team is at a point of change, it can transform how they work. And so there's we're going to go now into the structure behind a workplace ritual and what ingredients, when they're in place, lead to it having a positive effect in terms of bringing together what we discussed at the beginning, of creating that cohesion that you're looking for in the team. So it begins with the cue, the cueing of the ritual. For us, the cue is asking the question. The team has a question that they're trying to answer. So what do we value as a team? How do we move from values to behavior? That's the thing that everybody is aligned around and what they're trying to accomplish. From there, there's thinking as individuals. We give people the time to work by themselves first, figure out their answer to the question. And in doing so, we get their perspective, their individual perspective. We get clarity about what they think, and also we're reducing the bias that happens when you put a bunch of people in a room and somebody starts talking and everyone else starts focusing on that and gets anchored to that. Then there's sharing as equals. Each person gets equal time to share their perspective, and equal time is a very powerful thing. It can feel artificial at first, but it really opens up a lot of options for people. So say that you give each person 4 minutes to share. That means that they're the only person speaking. There's no questions or discussion. There's no agreements or anything like that. It's just that person owning the space. When the time is up, their time is done. If they don't want to talk the entire time, that's fine, but they still get that time. No one else gets to take it from them. They don't get to yield it 2 minutes early. Each person gets to take up this exactly the same amount of space, and equal time is I would say, is the most basic form of equity you can offer to each other. It's the most immediate way to shift power in a room. Then we've got a space for discussion, and all discussions will be pointing to making some choices together. So by the end of a ritual, you should have made a choice about something, decided on something related to the cue, what that initial question was. Making choices together also means that it's clear what trade-offs need to be made and how a particular choice is going to benefit the overall team. And this is the ritual's higher purpose. After all, a team is a choice. Each of you has to make that choice. And it's not just a choice that you make once. It's never one and done. So we like to say that talking has no future, and owning the outcome is part of that. If the team doesn't commit it to paper or immediately make tangible plans for what they're going to do that comes out of a ritual, then all the good work that you just did will vanish into the ether. So when you commit to an outcome, everyone on the team should be able to see how they were a part of it or where they fit in, even if they didn't get what they wanted out of the discussion. They understand why you're doing what you're doing. So if you haven't figured it out by now, we have a book about this concept of rituals in the workplace and how you can redesign how you work, et cetera. That's just a starting point. You can design what you need for your teams. You can adapt the things that we're sharing to what you need once you've got all the right pieces. And what we just shared with you, that's some of the ways to arrange those pieces together. So now we're going to give you some more material to work with, some more pieces to work from. There's going to be 4 more rituals you can use. And so this first one is about what are our norms as a team. So if you're trying to navigate complexity around your workplace norms, like work hours and meetings, this may be the one for you. So what are norms? Norms are common understandings of misunderstandings. Norms are common understandings of what is and isn't acceptable in terms of teams' behavior. And so most norms go unspoken and they end up being discovered, surprisingly, in situations that arise during team projects. So another insight around norms is that the easiest norm to uncover is around how people use time. So really, if you're trying to address a lot of workplace issues, this is the place that you need to start. So when we think about a ritual to get aligned about your team norms, you're going to have to start by identifying your individual work preferences. And so this ritual is built like the previous one, but you're going to see it plays out a little bit differently. So for this one, there's kind of like 4 categories of questions that you want to work through individually that help you understand your individual work preferences. And you'd be working on this on your own, and you'd be answering the questions that you believe are relevant for your team. So there are questions like, how long do you want to work each day? On what days? When do you prefer to take breaks, eat meals? When is the best time for team members to be working together? And how do you want to signal your availability to coworkers and when you need to step away? Pro tip, that's time to be working together and signaling your availability. You do not want to skip these questions. We overlook this a lot, and it's a really powerful place for people to talk about all the details of how they are expected to be, quote unquote, present at work. So entrances and exits, or the perceptions around them, are always ripe for misunderstandings. So there's the timepiece, and this is where you really should start. But we have to talk about place, where we want to work. Wow, like this past 15 months, at least in the United States, this last year has really changed this one for people. The concept of like, I'm at work. Where's the place that I work? Some of us are starting to go back to the office, or we've been doing it for a while. Now everybody else is coming back. And so conversations about places and spaces are going to happen with a little bit more nuance. So the question that we're asking now when working with teams is, what type of work environments are required for the team? The environment, which could be a combination of factors. And then from there, where do you prefer to work? What are the situations where you want to be in those places, and what's the flexibility that you need? Getting this on paper can be really clarifying. So there's time, there's place, and then there's the focus, like exactly how you want to be working. So how much time do you need to work alone or individually? How much time do you need working in collaboration with others on your team? How do you best communicate this? How do you want to communicate challenges or issues to your team? Because they're very likely to come up. So this is a really deep area. And so the focus, or how we want to work area, it's a space where we encourage people to spend more time because of the complexity of these questions. You might actually get these questions and work on them individually before you get into a room with your team, virtually or otherwise, and start discussing this stuff, just because it takes a while to sort of resolve the specifics for yourself. So that's totally fine. And the more that you do this type of ritual with your teams, the faster it's going to come together, because some of this information is going to be at your fingertips. Now, these last two questions, celebrating successes and addressing mistakes or failures. You don't want to overlook these questions. So around success, sometimes there's a big difference between how we usually do it and what we actually want to do around this. And so it's good to just be like, no, like we're actually going to stick to what we think we're going to do to celebrate what happens. But then if we have a failure or there's a mistake, this is the flashpoint for misunderstandings on teams. And yeah, you can't catch all the possible problems that might come up when you're working on a project with a single ritual, but really good questions can help address a lot of the issues up front before they blow up your team. So the fourth area is around benefit. What we'll gain from the work? What personal goals do you have for this project? What will you be learning from this project, and what will the team be learning? And then overall, like, what are we gaining from this project? So personal goals. Everyone should have personal goals on a project. You just should. We could do an entire workshop on why not having personal goals on a team is a terrible idea, but you'll just have to take our word for it in the context of this workshop. Also, the team needs to gain something from the project. We understand that might just be money. There's a variety of other things. So you kind of need to articulate that. Again, a team is a choice. It really helps if it's an informed choice. So if each person on the team individually gets a chance to work through these questions, you know what's coming because we told you how norms are designed. Now each person is going to share that, and they're going to have equal time to do so. Each person is going to have their different perspectives and preferences. These are individual wants. So it's okay, like I want to be in the office from 8 to 5 versus 10 to 7. I like to get my work done, my focus work before I get to work. I can't work in the evenings. There's lots of individual wants, especially when you're bringing a team together for the first time. They're often best case scenarios. So after everyone has get a chance to share, then it's a matter of, again, during a process of saying, well, if we're working together as a team, we're trying to balance the trade-offs between these different individual preferences. This is where the reality of life in the workplace come into play. That said, and we do have to acknowledge this, more senior people are usually a governing factor here, and there may be cultural pressure at play in how the norms begin to be formed. But if everyone gets an equal voice at the beginning about their preferences, if they have to make concessions, it's very clear what trade-offs are being made on behalf of what the team is trying to accomplish. So creating team norms, it's going to require making trade-offs. That's why they're norms. But you get to track those trade-offs. And like we discussed earlier, these are specific behaviors. They are behavioral commitments. They might become part of your overall values and behaviors work down the line in terms of the overall way that the team is working. So there's value in going through this process. It is transparent to everybody what they're doing and why they're doing it. So the last step, this is really important, making the commitment visible. And so yeah, it doesn't have to be a whole wall. It doesn't have to be this big, but it does need to be visible. And it does need to be easily changed because norms are tested based on all the situations that come up at work. And as we said when we were answering questions in the chat, the pro tip here is you should really start with just 6 to 8 norms, just a minimum number to start. More than that, it can be really hard to manage and track. So some of the times that you want to repeat this particular ritual, when you want to revisit your team norms, you should do it a few weeks after you create them because you'll know how they're sticking. After major project milestones, because sometimes when you're sprinting to the finish of a deliverable or going to do something, you make trade-offs. If there's a situation that comes up where everybody sees it immediately as breaking a norm, if someone joins or leaves the team because that's changing the behavioral commitments of the team, and then if somebody's gone for an extended period of time, these are the really common times that you're going to need to check this out, but it doesn't take a ton of time. You can just talk about the specifics of the norms that might be impacted. So the more that you do this, the easier it's going to get. And this gets back to us talking about the design thinking cycle at work. We're repeating it, we're discovering new insights, we're empathizing, coming up with new ideas, trying them out, and we're seeing how they work. We're going to, I think the word is iteration. Iteration. So norms are also for problem solving too. It's that part of design thinking that allows for new information, for people to adapt to new situations. You're learning from these cycles and applying it to the next one. And when these situations come up, your team, you can ask each other about it. So you can ask questions like, well, if this situation we just lived through is likely to happen again, shouldn't it be accounted for in our norms? If we should respond to other situations that might happen that we know are likely to come up, how is that going to impact our norms? So this becomes routine in how your team is thinking about and using norms to govern their shared mental model of trying how to get the work done. Okay, so that was norms, the norms ritual. The rest of these we're going to breeze through because you now know how these are constructed. We don't have to go through all the details. So this one is about what are our expectations as a team. We'll just skip to the end and show you what the basic layout is. So basic format for roles and responsibilities. It can be really helpful for large or unstructured projects and helping team members see how they fit into a larger picture. Individually, people in the team work through what they believe the team is expected to do and what they believe they're individually expected to do. The team puts all that information about what they believe the team is expected to do on the left, and they align on what expectations are real and reasonable that they need to accomplish together. Some of those expectations may be overall to the goal of the project, some may be about the client needs, and so forth. Then you've got what's on the right and what people are individually expected to do. Some of those expectations may be task-oriented. They may have deadlines and deliverables. Some may be more strategic, abstract, or relational. But the team is completely aligned on here's what I'm doing individually that I need to do to help serve the team. But this is what the team is expected to do. And I know how what I'm doing individually relates to the goals of what the team is expected to do. So you understand the tension between those two things. Structures like this fit really well into a digital space. We do this a lot in shared documents or in tracking software. It's really helpful and it gives more than just numbers in a spreadsheet or something like that. So let's look at another one. This one is more so done at the ends of projects. Some teams don't like to make changes midstream, but this is a good way that you can actually think about change in the middle of a project. So this ritual is what's called by designers and folks that work in product a retrospective. We used to be able to call them postmortems, but then someone figured out that's kind of rude, not to mention inaccurate. So now we call them retrospectives. We did not invent retrospectives. Nope. But we did come up with a few different ways of using them in project teams. So a retrospective, it comes at a strategic point in a project. There's always one at the end, sometimes after major milestones. And usually you're asked what worked well or what went well during a project and what didn't go so well. And then the team decides what they're going to do about that. So a lot of the work that we do is in product development. They use a form of that's called stop, start, continue. You may have seen it out in the wild. So in the case of doing this as a team ritual, you individually think about what worked well for the team, what didn't work as well. You share that with equal time. Then the team makes decisions and choices about which of those they believe they should address and what the team can continue or change in relationship to that. So You don't want to overlook what went well. I think humans have a seemingly limitless capacity to describe things that are going poorly. We're not that great about talking about what went well, why it went well, and we just don't spend time developing the vocabulary around that so we can preserve it. So if you don't know why something worked, how are you ever going to repeat it? And if you do know why something worked, you should have a space to share that. It's really valuable information, even beyond your team. So you see in this diagram, individual work, teamwork. Teams are cross-functional. They're really distributed. When you pull people together and they have a chance to do something like this, you can really have a sense of the impact of the work that you're having in the team and the ripple effects out to the greater organizations that you work in. So this is a more detailed process for retrospectives. When this becomes routine, it can go super fast. So this is the form that we run into most often, especially if we're doing this on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. This is the one that we use too. It's super easy to flip into a digital place, to pull into like the different communication systems that you have. And it's just like, okay, what worked well for us this week? What didn't work so well? What would we want to improve or continue? And so the improve or continue area, that's a great place to look and see if week over week something is working or not. So if you're testing a new behavior, a norm, a ritual, a team can talk about it in this space. Do we want to keep doing it? Do we want to change it? And you can fold that into influencing the way you use some of the other rituals that we shared with you. Okay, so last one. And you're going to know immediately if this is the one for you. What can we not change? So stepping back, before we talk about the ritual, there are a lot of assumptions and norms wrapped up in the constraints of what we do at work. And teams don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about these things, to see if they're actually true or not. Some of these constraints can be changed, and that realization is a pretty powerful one. Some individuals believe there are constraints where there actually aren't any, and you would want to put those conversations into a ritual like this. So in this ritual, you individually think about what are the constraints that we're working in for this project? What are the things I believe we can change, and what are the things I believe we can't change? The team will share that information and they'll debate and make choices about what constraints they actually believe they can change and what constraints they can't. And based on that, what is the team going to do? So some constraints, they can't be changed, but by giving the team the space, not to lament their lack of choices, but to decide how they're going to get through it, that can be a pretty powerful realization. But the team can do more than just put up with what's happening in a project or situation. Which kind of leads us to our last points. You can't always control the norms, the values, and the situations that shape your workplace, but you can control what your team agrees to regarding how they want to work together. Because, like we said earlier, a team is a choice. It's not just a choice you make once, it's every meeting, every document, every day. Each one of those is a choice, and each of us makes that choice. And when the team feels like their choices have been taken from them, they need to look at what's changed. Where did their agreements fall apart? What were they overlooking and what were they not prepared for? Come up with some ideas, build something, see if it works, then do it again. Keep making those choices. These negotiations around behavior are how we create a better workplace culture for all. The work that we do came from the understanding that teams do not want to wait around for quarterly budget approvals or yearly initiatives for the entire company to change around them so that their team can have a better experience. We say this a lot, but we want teams to start making things right today, not tomorrow.
And it is today, right? Okay, so move those cats and grab your notebook and your keyboard because we want to send you off with a plan. All right, so design thinking thing. This is, sometimes this is called an asset analysis. There's a lot of fancy words for it, but it's basically making a plan that we think might work. So the first thing you want to do, we want you to think about this really tactically. So pick one of those rituals that we went over. What do you value as a team? What are our norms as a team? What are expectations as a team? What should we change? What can we not change? Just pick that single word and then throw it in the chat. If you're like, all of them,
Pick one.
we still love you. That's great. But pick one to start. Okay, we got some expectations, we got some norms, we got some more norms, more expectations. Excellent. All righty. All right, okay. So you sort of zeroed in on a ritual that you might want to try. Okay, so now we're going to do this for real. When you introduce this ritual, what do you already have that you can build from? So that can be people, materials, things you already have. We had somebody who's just like, oh, hey, we have that moment at the close of our meeting for those questions. The norms that you've already got in your organization, throw that into the Zoom chat. And honestly, if all you have are sticky notes and some pens and an hour a week, throw that in there. It is a resource. It is something for you. If you just have that one friend in Nevada to talk to, put them in there. That is a thing that you have that you can build from. So just throw that in there. And don't underestimate the power of really good pens. It's like we do a lot of workshops and wow, people have opinions on that.
All right, cool. So immediately see an ingredient that we see come up a lot in the material you're going to design around, which is the weekly team meetings. Figuring out how to factor a ritual or break the ritual down to be done individually and brought into those team meetings with the right rules is a really good way to do it and afford it the right time and space for the team discussion, especially if folks that are on your team haven't gone through this type of process before. It gives you a chance to walk through it and get comfortable with it in that team meeting environment.
Okay, so you've had a chance to think about the stuff that you have that you can build on, or maybe just the stuff that you have. But okay, now let's think about this, what do you need? And the more specific you can be on this, the better. So do you need space? How much? Do you need another hand? How many hands? Do you need time? How much time? Be specific, because this is just what you need to try something, to test it. I think time is the one that comes up the most often. Most of the rituals here take about an hour, and people are like, an hour is too long. We had a conversation a few months ago with someone who was like, yeah, things are going really bad. We had 2 people who were so stressed out that they actually missed work. We're just too busy for this. And I went, hold on. You had people who missed work due to stress. So each of them is working what? A 10, 12, 15-hour day. Those are those hours that are lost. And I am asking you to put an hour at the front of your project or an hour as triage in the middle of your project. But that is a really difficult calculation for people to make, right? So you kind of okay, what can I do in an hour? Sometimes you may not be able to throw something in front of a team immediately. You may want to practice it yourself. You can put that in there too. It's just I need time to practice, or I need 2 hours to make worksheets, or whatever you need.
So there's some great stuff that's in the chat. I want to freeze on the one around the willingness to participate in something that seems so unfamiliar. So a strategy, remember when we talked about teams are built behavior by behavior? A lot of what we shared with you, there's a lot of steps that you're going through to get to the answer about a particular question. Sometimes the way to build an on-ramp with the team to do a full ritual is to start by proving its value around a very specific thing. So if your team is struggling around norms around time, you might say, instead of talking about norms around time, place, focus, and benefit, you might say, you know what? Let's just talk about working hours. Let's talk about norms about working hours. What is the individual preferences? And in doing that, introduce equal time for people to share that information. You might do that and say, great, everyone had a chance to share, reflect on that. Next week, let's take that information and then let's do the next step, which is let's make choices. Let's form a single norm. We've worked with a number of teams that, due to their working cultures, they assume they can just sort of pull in all of this and do all the rituals. We had someone say, how can we do all of them right away? We're like, you can't.
You can't.
you have to work behavior by behavior. So part of the design process for you and your teams and your work environment is breaking down how to best sequence and introduce things that help to build towards the behaviors that enable the ability to discuss specific behaviors and to set norms.
If you've got willingness as one of your like hot points, it's probably a good idea to look at what can we not change, and just run that ritual for yourself to sort of help you zoom in on like, okay, may not be a good idea to look at this, but I think we can probably change this. And that sort of gives you the headspace to be able to sort out what you believe those barriers are. It's also good to like run that by somebody else, and you're like, I don't think we can change any of these things. And then, you know, you've got a partner or a colleague who's just like, oh yeah, we can totally change this. And it doesn't feel like, hey, we're going to do design thinking next quarter, you know, which is a really heavy lift, right?
Yeah. So the other thing to call out is around open communication, or open and transparent communication. You might need a way to prime or begin something with a group of people to warm them up, or to set the guardrails about how you need to have that conversation. This might be also where you're leveraging overall seniority. If there are people in the organization that believe it's going to help to create a better project team environment or outcome, it's figuring out exactly how much they can influence stepping into that conversation.
So we have this, you know, the devil's advocate with the we charge by the hour argument, or we charge by the 15-minute argument, or the quarter hour. And this is a good argument. And we run into this a lot. And this is really dip into your MBA brain and look at risk analysis. Because if you have the ability, it's like, you know, if you do this first time, it will take about an hour. Updates can take minutes. You can piggyback it off of an existing thing. And if you compare the cost of a starting hour with the cost of hours lost to burnout, missed deadlines, employees who leave, employees who get sick, that is a cold calculus that will always work in your favor. So if you have the ability to actually pull those numbers and say, how much does it cost by not investing this hour up front, or not investing 20 minutes here, 20 minutes here, or 20 minutes here? What is it actually costing us? Those numbers do not lie. And we have been with organizations where we've come in and been like, we're going to talk to HR, and we're going to figure out like what this actual cost is, because we know, you know, that design doesn't get taken very seriously on the business front sometimes, but we can definitely play hardball when it comes to loss of time, loss of productivity, just loss of people, like having to rehire someone in this environment that is tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, so last but not least, what's the first thing you're going to do? What's the first step you're going to take towards doing this ritual? Because sometimes introducing a single behavior, just like David said, sometimes just one introduction is necessary to adapt an existing team ritual, or to build towards adopting a new ritual. So first step, first thing, you close your eyes and you see yourself doing it. That is a behavior, and you really want this to be a behavior. So if you are like, okay, I'm going to introduce this single behavior, do you send an email first? Do you write it in your notebook? Do you talk to a colleague at work? What's that very first thing that you're going to do? And just throw that into the chat. This is kind of like the community commitment part, right? Okay, so it's just like, we've got this, like, okay, I already have this space. It's the claim recovery team meetings. Here's my commitment. You know, this is the first thing.
We're gonna brainstorm.
Brainstorm.
Yes. Cool.
Oh, so someone's going to talk about our presentation. No pressure on us. I hope
Yeah,
this works. I hope this works.
Yeah,
Right.
share the recording and the slides.
Maybe we should do a Sherwin certification. I feel like this is like
no.
All right, so if you are thinking like the first thing that you're going to do, and it might take you a little bit to figure out what that first step is, right?
So Liz, yes, absolutely. For the norms exercise, we've done that through so many different technological ways. It's been through Google Forms, it's been through Google presentations where each person gets a slide. It's been through people having separate documents and then pooling them together.
There is a trade-off there, though, that you should be aware. It may, for some teams, it matters less than for others, which is the first person to type in the doc skews the room, right? So it's like the first person to put information in, everybody's like, oh, David said that. Oh, mine sounds dumb now. Now I don't want to do this. Or, oh, I've got one that's so much better. Like you sort of have this weird play that happens. Whereas if people have the ability to work individually, separately, and then put it together, but that's really difficult to do in a digital format. So, just kind of moving forward, that's just what you need to know is that trade-off. If you have a lot of what we affectionately call cultural pressure, a digital space is going to reinforce that cultural pressure, especially with people who are new or have a little bit of less professional experience. That's a cultural pressure that's difficult to avoid in a digital space. Okay, so as we promised, we want to have another space for a Q&A, and we're kind of sort of moving into that. So if you've got something, throw it in the chat, and we're going to do our best to go through this. There was just a note. There's just a note about the toolkit that we have available with the book, and that's like if you're with a team that does not want to invent anything, like if they are, if they are recipe people rather than cookbook people. A lot of the forms that we have or the layouts, like all of that work is already done for you. So we do have that in a kit. So we had a note here about the after action review in the military. I grew up in a military family, so I'm very familiar with that vernacular. It's sort of like each industry has their own way of talking about things. What went well is the piece that I would always want people to hold on to, not because I'm, a bizarre optimist and I'm like, let's only talk about good things, but because we just don't have a very good vocabulary for it. Okay, so let's go back to this question about the people who are higher in the hierarchy. Like their proposed values, do they carry more weight than those lower in the hierarchy? And the answer to that is yes. Not just yes, but yes, absolutely.
I was gonna say, like, the only thing I'd say there is if you do choose to take that value, you still potentially get to take behaviors that everyone else that's on the team proposes that they want to include tied to that value. Because again, it's how you define it through behavior. That's what matters. Eventually, we see most teams when they go through this process, certain words that have more meaning in that culture, especially if they're core values, might float to the top. But the behaviors that get assigned to them, there's more friction around that.
Also, the stronger or more rigid the hierarchy, the more likely it is that there's a work siloing effect going on. So the people who are on the lower end of the hierarchy, their work happens very separate from the work of the rest of the hierarchy. And there's usually like a little pass-through moment. There's like one deliverable or one document or whatever. And that actually allows teams to sort of have a lot of autonomy about how they get their own work done, because their process is really behind a heavy curtain from people who are on a different level of the hierarchy. So it's weird, like the values, the strength of the values is definitely stronger at the top, but the power of the behaviors is usually stronger at the bottom.
So we've got this question from Anjali. How does all of this work when people are on various different teams that are changing as many lawyers are within a firm setting? So we work with product organizations in which there are people across a variety of different teams that are constantly changing, that are working together on shared goals that may change on a monthly or weekly basis. So we empathize with the situation. The way we see teams navigate this, that have this kind of blending of teams, is that teams that work together more frequently will state the norms that they've set for daily or weekly engagement with others. So that way it's clear if you're communicating with them or trying to collaborate with them when they're available from a time perspective, and where they may be if you need to initiate a meeting, again, aligning on norms around time. Different teams come up with strategies of how to communicate that. Some of the teams we work with use Slack or instant messaging. They'll put the information about that in channels, so that way everybody who enters into that channel for that particular team understands when they're available, when they're likely to respond, and so forth. So it's a matter of figuring out where those people are likely to be. It's kind of like the sign on the door before you enter in the place that the work is happening with those people. So everybody negotiates the right simple system to be able to communicate that information to those who come into a team, kind of like barge into the room and say like, hey, I'm part of the team now, we need to do this.
Yeah, there's some teams, if they've got, if they've got team members who wear a lot of hats, if they're a project coordinator, so they're working on, maybe 3 different teams, there is a lot of, there's a lot of balancing that happens there. And sometimes teams will be like, okay, like, Jeff, our project coordinator, or, like, they're only available to our team at this particular time. And that is something that's broadcasted. And this is one of the reasons why we say that space needs to be really flexible, because if someone needs to take their kid to the dentist, or someone's car gets stolen, or whatever, like, you need to be able to be like, okay, like the norms for these next 3 days are not going to work. How can we respond right now in real time, transparently, to say, this was our obligation, we can't meet it, and this is how it's going to change. If you have a framework that a lot of people are using and are pretty comfortable with, then moving from project to project, the people can cycle in, they can cycle out, they can norm super fast, because they sort of already are thinking about how this way works. It just takes practice. And that's kind of the lift for a lot of people, is that they'll run through this once and they'll be like, nah, I don't think this is going to work. You have to, that's like the super important part of that design thinking, which is that if you're not repeating it, you're just kind of doing this one and done, and it's already expiring on the shelf. So you really have to, I think that's kind of a difficult lift, is getting people to commit to wanting to try.
So thanks so much for inviting us. That's about it from us. As we mentioned, this is the book we've been telling you about. So if you want more pieces for your team, this is a great place to start. It's a little cookbook. It's not just a collection of recipes. So again, thank you again. We greatly appreciate it. It was wonderful chatting with all of you.
And if something comes up, you now know where to find us.
Yes.
If you were like, I couldn't quite think of the way of putting that question together, drop us a line. We're waiting for you. It's great. And we're really glad that we could be here today, and that you could hang out and do some work with us. And thank you again.
David and Mary, I'd just like to say thank you so much for this time, for sharing your knowledge and some tools on kind of how we can implement these things. We are in a period of such change, and this could be so pivotal to our teams and how we work in the future in this very hybrid environment. So thank you very much. I also just wanted to put a special thank you out to Ann Bradford, who has curated this entire week, as well as the Wellbeing in Law Week. She has worked tirelessly to bring different speakers, different perspectives together, and we owe her a huge amount of gratitude for all of the education that we're receiving. So thank you all. Have a great week. Have a great afternoon, and take care.